We'll now turn our attention to Part 2 of Charge 1 related to the cause of action known as wrongful birth. The charge directs us to examine its history in Texas, its effect on the practice of medicine, and its effect on children with disabilities and their families. There are just two witnesses. The chair calls two invited witnesses, Joe Pojman, Executive Director of the Texas Alliance for Life, and Marie Robinson, Executive Director of the Texas Medical Board. Good afternoon. Dr. Pojman, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Pojman. I'm representing Texas Alliance for Life. I want to thank Governor Dan Patrick, you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the committee for this hearing. I'm here to bring to your attention a type of medical malpractice lawsuit you may not have heard of, you may be unfamiliar with. It's called wrongful birth. In a wrongful birth lawsuit, parents of a child with disability may sue medical providers for failing to inform them that their child would be born with a disability in enough time to abort the child. The injury the parents suffer is having given birth to a disabled child rather than aborting the child. Parents seek to collect the costs of raising their child for his or her entire life. Now, where did this come from? This came from a court case from Texas Supreme Court. It was the first in the country that created this wrongful birth cause of action. It was called Jacobs v. Thymer in 1975, and it involved a woman who gave birth to a child who was disabled. She had rubella and was not properly informed of that. The court allowed recovery of expenses for the care and treatment of that child's physical impairment indefinitely. So that was the first in the entire country. We have great problems with the wrongful birth cause of action. First, this type of lawsuit sends a terrible message that the child with disability would be better off had he or she been aborted. That's a terrible message for society to send. It may encourage medical professionals to overcautiously seek out all potential disability, and especially to promote abortion in order to avoid liability. And it makes medical professionals liable for a disability they did nothing to cause. There's a real problem with fairness there. Now, I want to distinguish wrongful birth lawsuits from something else called wrongful life. Now, a wrongful life claim, a disabled person, or typically his or her representative, sues the provider for negligent advice or treatment which caused the disabled person to be born alive or to be kept alive. Now, Texas does not recognize a wrongful life cause of action, and the Texas Supreme Court found that in 1984, a case called Nelson v. Cruzen. Now, what about other states? Well, here's the landscape regarding wrongful birth lawsuits in other states. 28 states and the District of Columbia have recognized wrongful birth cause of action that exists today. At least 9 states have eliminated that cause of action by statute. Those statutes have been challenged 3 times, and in each, the state courts have upheld those statutes as constitutional under their own constitutions. The states that have eliminated wrongful birth lawsuit, as I said, there's 9 of them, and they're listed in your notes. Now, of the states that have upheld those statutes, there's Utah, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Again, we give some details about why those state courts upheld those. Now, what kind of awards are we talking about here? Again, this is the courts are awarding, or the juries are awarding, the costs of raising the child indefinitely. Here's a couple of examples that we found. And some of these are pretty eye-opening. State of Washington, 2013, $50 million judgment for a child was born with a disability related to chromosomes. 2012, Oregon, a $3 million judgment related to a child born with Down syndrome. Florida, 2011. Jury awarded $4.5 million for a physical disability. Pretty, I would say not a minor thing, the child, but nevertheless, $4.5 million for something the physician had nothing to do with causing. Now here in Texas, we don't know how many of these are going on. We suspect that these are settled out of courts because there are no reported cases. By reported, I mean in appellate cases. But I do note, and this is in your packet, there is a law firm in Houston that specializes in wrongful birth lawsuits. They're on the internet. If you Google around, you'll see some YouTube videos from law firms that specialize in this. So we brought this idea, and I will say no one came to us and asked us to champion this. This is something that's been on our hearts for a number of years. We, last session in the spring, Representative Simmons carried a bill. It was House Bill 3008, and I think there's a copy of that available. Very short statute that just eliminates that cause of action. It does not, and I think it's based on things that have worked in other states. That was heard and voted out of the Judiciary and Civil Jurisprudence Committee. But it did not make it to the floor. It was late in the session. So I guess our plea to you, Mr. Chairman and member of this committee, is to consider this as a topic for next session, because I think there's a real need for it, and I think it would do a real good if we had a bill that would eliminate wrongful birth lawsuits in Texas.